Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Katie Smoller. I am the Director of Educational Programs here at the Journey Through Hallowed Ground. And today we are continuing our exploration of the journey as we visit different historical sites throughout the heritage area. And today we are joined by Executive Director Andrew Dalton at the Adams County Historical Society. So Andrew, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Katie. We appreciate the opportunity to get out in front of more people. I actually attended a summer camp with the Journey Through Hallowed Ground when I was in middle school. So it's special to be here with a great organization today.
Oh, that's so great to hear. And we are continuing that middle school program this summer for anyone listening. But that's really great to hear.
It's wonderful. Yeah, well, so I grew up in Gettysburg. I've always loved the history of this area, but my real impetus for joining the Adams County Historical Society is that we're telling a different side of the story. It's the story of the people and the community and the experiences of, ordinary Americans who were caught in some of the most incredible circumstances with the battle, with Lincoln's visit to Gettysburg in 1863, with the World Wars, Dwight D. Eisenhower coming to the community. So it's an all-encompassing story, I think, that's much broader than just 3 days in July of 1863. So I thought I'd share a little bit more about what the Historical Society is all about and what we're doing right now with our big project that's underway. So this is the current facility that houses the Adams County Historical Society. It leaves a lot to be desired, and we are working right now to build a new structure that'll house not only our collections, but also a new museum. But the Historical Society was founded in the 1880s, and over the years, it's collected over 1 million historic items that are really significant to the history of the area. And because it's Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, this is some of the best local history in the country. So we have records, we have letters and diaries, we have artifacts, we have photographs, images of people who've lived here, records of businesses and organizations, and pretty much the entire preserved memory of this really famous community. So it's a really wonderful repository. It's kind of the resource that you've never heard of here in Gettysburg, but over the years, a lot of authors and scholars and students of all things Gettysburg have used the Historical Society's collections with books and manuscripts and articles. But we're hoping to really expand and fill a gap that we see in terms of what's available here in Gettysburg to tell that other side of the story. So it is about people. We have thousands of stories of people that are just incredible. And, like I said earlier, people who were caught in the middle of the Battle of Gettysburg, people who were involved with the development of the battlefield and Gettysburg as a tourist attraction, presidents who've visited, presidents who've lived here like Eisenhower. But it's kind of a mix of the ordinary and the extraordinary, but everyone's lives kind of were intertwined with this place, which is one of the most visited destinations in the world. So just to give you a view of some of our artifacts in the collection, it dates all the way back to literally billions of years ago. We have a chunk of meteorite that was discovered near Gettysburg in the 1880s that you see here on the left. We also have hundreds, probably thousands of Native American artifacts that were found in the fields and streams and woods around Gettysburg and the larger area. And that's, that early story is something we're going to be highlighting in addition to, the more famous stories like the battle. We have items related to the founding of the town. So this is a chair from the Geddes Tavern. James and Samuel Geddes operated a tavern that became Gettysburg at a crossroads from the 1760s until the 1780s, when the town was actually formally laid out. And on the right is the original survey for the land that would become Gettysburg, one of the really cool documents that we have in our collection. Then going a little bit further forward in time, these are some items related to, prominent members of the community early on, including Thaddeus Stevens, who I'm sure some viewers have heard of, was a really famous abolitionist, but before that was an attorney here in Gettysburg for a couple decades. And he had a library of books in his office. We have some of those books and other items that belong to Thaddeus Stevens. And then on the right is one of my favorite items in our entire collection. It's actually a manumission document, or the freedom papers for a slave. And the slave's name was Clem Johnson, and he was actually owned by Francis Scott Key. And in 1831, Francis Scott Key brought Clem Johnson to Gettysburg to execute these freedom papers. And so this is a document filled out in Francis Scott Key's hand and signed by Francis Scott Key for this slave named Clem Johnson in Gettysburg in 1831. So just a really remarkable document and a remarkable story that you wouldn't necessarily associate with Gettysburg. And like I showed early on, we have lots of photographs of people who lived in the area throughout time. These are some families and individuals who lived in Gettysburg during the battle. On the left is a 21-year-old woman named Sally Myers, and she has a really remarkable story. She was a nurse after the Battle of Gettysburg, tended to the wounded in her home. And one of the soldiers who actually died in her arms, she became friends with the family and his brother, and ended up actually marrying the brother. And so this is kind of a romance that was spurred on by the events of the battle. And they had children who ended up staying in the community, and one of them founded the Historical Society here. So we have this really tangible connection to these events in 1863, but it's not the same story you might get at the visitor center or at a military museum. This is the story of the people and their experiences, and it's backed up by all kinds of letters and diaries and newspaper articles and images that these people left behind. And so that's the story that we're going to tell in our new facility. And then, more specifically to the aftermath of the battle, this was just a cataclysmic event for our community. I like to talk about it as, the way you talk about a natural disaster. This was an event that forever changed Adams County and Gettysburg. And so there was a lot left behind to remind the people of what had happened here. On the left is a Confederate surgeon's kit that was left behind at a farm just about a mile from where I'm sitting today. And there's a note from the doctor, and also a tear in the back of the kit where the doctor had actually pulled out cotton to continue to treat the wounded after they had run out of bandages. So this is just such a kind of jarring artifact that reminds us of how devastating it was for the community following the battle. On the right is a sign from a local tailor shop that was hit by 4 bullets. It hung in the square of Gettysburg. And again, when you see something like this up close, I think it really just helps people understand how terrifying this was for the community, and how the legacy of the battle was something that stayed with Gettysburg for many, many, many decades. And even today there are people in our community in their 80s or 90s who remember their grandparents talking about stories of the battle. So it's an event that really wasn't all that long ago, and you can still see damage in the town of Gettysburg, cannonballs in houses, bullet damage on buildings. But we have some artifacts that are, thankfully were kept by the families, like these 2 items that help us understand. Along the same lines, we have all kinds of items picked up off the battlefield by the families. These are artillery shells. And on the right is actually a cannonball that was taken out of the cherry tree at the Sherfy farm on the battlefield. And you can see in this photograph, it's a little hard maybe over Zoom to see the detail, but there's a cannonball in that tree, and the very same cannonball is the one sitting next to it that was given to the Adams County Historical Society. So artifacts, that are tied to a specific place are, of course, extra valuable to us because they help us tell a story. This is maybe the rarest item in our collection. It's an original program from the Gettysburg Address. And there are probably only a few copies of this in the world. This one, obviously, someone didn't appreciate the significance of because they scribbled their account work on the bottom. It's from a local business ledger. But actually, when I worked here in high school, I was a volunteer, and I was lucky enough to find this document in a box of unlabeled papers upstairs in our vast holdings. So discoveries are still being made all the time with repositories as large as ours. And this item's never been displayed. It's never been in a museum. And now for the first time, we're going to be able to use this to help tell the story of Gettysburg and Adams County in our new facility. More recently, of course, the Eisenhowers came to Gettysburg. In 1950, they purchased a farm here and spent most of the rest of their lives here. And this is the pen that they used to register to vote in Adams County. And then President Eisenhower did vote for himself for re-election in Adams County, just about a few hundred yards actually from where we're building our new facility. And then this is Mamie's hat on the right. We have several of her hats, but she loved these, classic 1950s decorative caps, and she'd wear them in almost every photo you see of her. So we have several of the hats that she gave to friends of hers in Gettysburg. So, our collection is just massive, and right now it's not in a great state. We have two storage facilities, and they're both lacking climate control. They have no fire protection. And I showed you early in the slideshow, the house that we're in now with our headquarters, it has really nothing protecting the valuable treasures that we've been holding on to for decades. And so that's why we really need a new home for the Adams County Historical Society. But beyond that, we want to tell the story of this community for the millions of people who visit Gettysburg, because I think it's equally important, if not even of more, intrigue and importance to people to hear the stories of real people, not just troop movements and strategy and generals' decision making. So we want to tell that side of the story. This is what we're doing. So we're building a 29,000 square foot complex on the northern edge of Gettysburg, next to an existing nursing home, and actually right near the Gettysburg College campus, for those of you who are familiar with Gettysburg. We actually have already completed a small storage building, but we're building, and actually I should point out that this is what our storage had looked like until just a few months ago. We started to move it into one of our new buildings at this site where we're creating the new home for the Historical Society. But it had been packed away literally in wooden crates for decades, as you see here. This is the building. This is the main building, I should say. There's a smaller storage building behind it, but this will house a large museum, a large program and event center, and a reading room and archives for people to come in and discover through our holdings any answers to questions that they may have about Gettysburg or Adams County. So the cornerstone, I think, of the entire project is this museum that we're putting in. And I wanted to just briefly touch on that. Here's the complex again, just so you get a better idea. But and here it is under construction. So this is taken about a week ago. And it's been about 10 years since there's been a new museum or attraction in Gettysburg. So we're very excited to be, the next big thing that's happening here for all of you who visit Gettysburg. We hope you'll come and see this. We're hoping to have it open by February of 2023. But I wanted to really hone in on the museum because we've decided to work with an excellent firm out of Washington, D.C., Healy Kohler Design. They're probably best known for the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia. But they're helping us design about a 5,000 square foot immersive area. It's more than your typical museum, which I want to just elaborate on briefly here. But it'll tell the full story of the community, starting with literally prehistoric times and dinosaur tracks that we have in rocks, all the way through the present to the Eisenhowers and their contribution to Gettysburg. This is the second floor. You can check all this out on our website, but really I want to focus on these last four images in the slideshow here. So this is early in the museum. We're actually going to recreate the Gettys Tavern and show you what it was like in a kind of colonial crossroads to sit around the tables of the tavern. And we'll have audio from above kind of illustrating what it was like and what you might hear in the tavern and some activities for kids. Then if you get a little further into the museum, this is an immersive room that's actually built to be in the middle of the battle. And so it's called Caught in the Crossfire. And when you enter this room, you'll basically be transported into a home on the battlefield, and the family has sought refuge below you in the cellar. And so you'll hear them, speaking from below you, and you'll hear the sounds of the battle, feel things, in the room passing by you, bullets whizzing through the room and hitting the wall. And we'll really try to transport the visitor into that moment of what it was like to have your home and your property turned into a war zone. Then when we talk about the Gettysburg Address and the remembering of the battle and remembering of Lincoln's visit, we're going to have a wall of faces of people who were there in the crowd and heard Lincoln that day. And we'll tell their stories. So you've probably heard the Gettysburg Address story from the perspective of Lincoln, but we'd like to have you hear it from the perspective of a 12-year-old girl who, talked about what it was like to be there in the crowd that day and what Lincoln looked like and the sadness in his face and the joy of the people coming up and for the first time ever seeing the president of the United States. People had never really seen the president. They'd never heard him speak unless they had heard him in person. So it was a big deal for the community and of course for the nation when President Lincoln visited. Then this is a little later in the museum. We're going to talk about the Eisenhowers, and there are at least 26 presidents who've visited Gettysburg and Adams County. So we're going to tell their stories and what happened when they came to town. And then also the stories of, World War I and World War II. There was a Nazi POW camp in Gettysburg. There was a World War I training camp in Gettysburg that was actually commanded by a young Dwight D. Eisenhower. And so we're going to kind of tell this dual story of what's happening locally, but what's happening nationally and what Gettysburg represents to the world. And so it's a really exciting opportunity, I think, for us to expand the story. The museum will be called Gettysburg Beyond the Battle. And we have a lot of great people behind it. Ken Burns is involved with the project. Author Jeff Shera is involved with the project. Susan Eisenhower, the granddaughter of President Eisenhower, is involved. And so we are really working to get the word out about this project. And it'll be great, I think, for people who are taking the journey through hallowed ground to have one more thing to do in Gettysburg when they're here in 2023. So I think that's pretty much all I have to say, but I'm happy to answer any questions or any comments that you might have. But thanks for this opportunity.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing all that with us. I'm really looking forward to checking it out when it opens. And I did add the link to the website in the chat so people can check it out that way as well. And yeah, we got some questions. So please welcome Ben and Anjali, two of our interns here, and they're going to be helping us out with the Q&A.
A great presentation. Let's see. Let's jump into some questions. What is the collections process like when obtaining new documents or artifacts for the Historical Society?
It's a good question. So a long time ago, people used to just kind of give everything that was old to Historical Society. So if somebody had an old typewriter or an old piano, they'd give it to us. Now we try to only take items that really have a story that helps us tell the history of Adams County and or Gettysburg. And so if there's a good background and good provenance, and the person who owned the item is from the area or has some connection to the community, we'll take items like that. But we tend to stick to what's in our scope.
A next question that we have for you: does the Historical Society work with Gettysburg National Military Park? Are those two ever connected?
We do, yes. So we're great friends of the whole staff over at Gettysburg National Military Park and the Gettysburg Foundation. We're actually in this project kind of trying to complement their story that they have there, which is, I think, really an excellent and well done museum and narrative over there, which is the story of the battle. And of course, that'll always be, I think, the primary destination when visitors come to Gettysburg. But we hope we can add to that story and have something for people to do next, or if they've already been there and done that, after visiting again, they'll come and see us. So but we have worked on a lot of programs together with the park. I think they have a fantastic staff and really knowledgeable people to interpret Gettysburg and the battle. But we're looking forward to playing a bigger role and being an even larger partner in the future.
How are you guys dealing with the sort of new wave of politicized history, especially concerning subjects near to or in the Civil War? And especially you're talking about dealing with a variety of common people's opinions and a vast variety of viewpoints. Have things changed in recent years from your guys' perspective, or how have interactions been shaped?
That's a great question. I don't think so. We've always tried to let the characters speak for themselves. So we want to present things in their historical time period and the way that they were written. We're not going to try to whitewash anything. But at the same time, we're not trying to exert any of our own beliefs or opinions on the visitor. I don't like when museums or historic sites try to do that. And I think that our job as historians and as, archivists and as, hosts for visitors is to tell an objective, honest story and narrate it from our perspective as little as possible and just let the story speak for themselves.
along those lines of the question that you just answered, obviously there's such a vast history of the community. So how do you prioritize what stories to tell and what stories not to tell? And how do you cater to all of the people who visit?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's a great question. So it is a difficult process to decide what to include because the collection is so large. We kind of set up a few elements to evaluate what we're going to include. And number one is we want to include things that will be appealing to a national audience. So, we had a museum 20 years ago, and there was a room for every town and township, every, church, every family, and it was split up into all these little subsets of Adams County history. And a lot of that probably wouldn't appeal to a visitor, let's say from, Wisconsin or California. So we are telling local history, but we want to tell local history that wraps into a larger national issue or theme. So, that's our focus, is to kind of be broad enough and be at a higher level with it so that we're not too into the weeds with, this one family or this one story. If it's not really a story that anybody would enjoy or would find exciting. But we're also working really hard. I mean, I think Adams County history has definitely excluded certain stories, and we want to make sure that those stories are given the attention that they deserve. The Black history in Gettysburg and in Adams County is fascinating, and it is tied directly to every chapter of the history of the community. And the Black communities in Gettysburg has played an integral role in shaping what Gettysburg is today. And so that is going to be highlighted throughout, not just, sometimes you see in a museum, they'll put all of Black history into one corner or one room, and that's the Black history section. We're not doing that. Black history is American history, and we're going to put it in every section where it belongs, because it's no different than the rest of the history of the county. And the same thing with the Hispanic community here, which has played an enormous role in shaping what Gettysburg and Adams County is today. And so, the last 50 years or so of the museum, we're certainly going to highlight those stories as well. So I think, we want to tell good stories that people will really respond to, but at the same time, we do have a responsibility to look into the past and see what stories maybe should have been highlighted that weren't.
It's very noble historical work, I think. Let's see. Yeah, we have a question. Are you planning anything specific within the museum for visiting school students?
Yes. So we are really excited about that. I think a lot of museums don't do enough for kids. And so, our first exhibit, when you walk in, kids will actually be able to touch the footprints of a dinosaur that walked through the Gettysburg area 200 million years ago. And so throughout the museum, we want to have interactive, displays where kids have something to do, something that's exciting. We're going to work on scavenger hunts and special programming that's specific for younger visitors. But, I've always loved history. It breaks my heart when young people think it's boring or hate history. So I want to make sure we go out of our way to have things for kids to do that really sparks their interest.
Continuing with the museum, what was the process like to get the museum started?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's hard to even remember. So I've been director for 2 years. It's an incredible honor to do this. I grew up here, went to the Gettysburg College, but I'd say we started our museum planning maybe 6 months into my time as director here. Starting out, I think we have a massive collection, and just sorting through and deciding what might be included in the museum was probably a year-long process, where we physically opened every box we could get our hands on and sorted through to see, is this part of a story that we want to tell? We put together an outline, but it's been very exciting. Things keep popping up where we try to fit an artifact in at the last minute because we didn't know we had it, and it's perfect for one section. But I'd say the most rewarding part of the whole process is working with this team at Healy Kohler Design out of Washington, and they are just phenomenal. And they've really added a layer of creativity and excitement to how the museum will be received. And I just can't wait to implement those plans. I think for us, the most exciting thing is this room that allows you to be, caught in the crossfire of the battle. with light and sound and movement of the floors, shaking of the floors. I mean, I think we can really help people see what it was like for these people in these just terrifying moments of the battle, not knowing what was happening outside or above their heads. So I think it's been a long process, but I can't wait to have people come in and see what we've been working on.
So many great things going on there and will be going on there. We always like to sort of ask and I don't think I'm missing any questions, as a sort of conclusion question, what advice you might have for anyone else that's interested in history, or maybe your own personal story of how you got to be directing as you are now, and even advice you might have to someone interested in building up their own local historical society in their own community. That's
a great question. I mean, I don't know why I've been drawn to history, but growing up in Gettysburg, I think it's easy to kind of catch the bug. I've always been fascinated with the passing of time and how something can either change so radically over 100, 200 years, or it can stay exactly the same. Looking at a photograph from 1863 and then looking at a building today that looks almost identical in that photograph, there's something about that I've always found fascinating. But I think in terms of advice, I would just say there are local historical societies and museums all around the country in your community, and they need help. They need, younger people, fresh blood to really, help historical societies that are, perhaps losing enthusiasm, losing members, losing, touch perhaps with social media and the internet and how things are being done now. So if you love history and you want to, really get in on the ground level and discover things that have never been, talked about or used, I think the going to your local historical society is just a great way to start, finding your passion. And, you never know what you're going to discover in some of these places where there are just stacks of boxes and books and, and records. And that's what I found here. And I was so lucky that I found it.
That's wonderful. Andrew, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing all of this. I think I can speak for everyone. We say we're really excited to see the final product and all the hard work you're putting into this important project.
Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it.
And thank you everyone for watching at home. We will be back here next week as we continue our virtual programming as we explore James Monroe's Highlands. So hope to see you there and have a wonderful rest of your day.